In a small-town diner, a 7-year-old girl watched 3 soldiers corner a lone woman at the counter. The entire room stayed silent as the harassment escalated. Then the little girl turned to her father and whispered 2 words that would change everything. What happened next took 10 seconds. What it revealed had been hidden for 5 years. The next morning, military vehicles surrounded his house, and a Navy Admiral stepped out to ask one question that would force this single father to choose between the quiet life he built and the warrior he used to be. From which city in the world are you watching this video today? If you enjoy stories about courage and hidden sacrifice, I'd be honored if you subscribed. Now, let me tell you what really happened in that diner. In the small town of Pinehurst, just outside Fort Carson, there was a diner called Ruby's that had been serving the same breakfast menu for 30 years. The booths were cracked vinyl patched with duct tape, the coffee was always too hot, and the waitress knew every regular by name. Every Saturday morning at exactly 8:15, a faded blue pickup truck would pull into the gravel lot and park in the same spot beneath the oak tree. A man and his daughter would climb out, the same ritual they had followed for the past 3 years, and walk through the front door like clockwork. His name was Darius Mitchell, though most people in town just called him Darius. He was a black man in his mid-30s, with rich brown skin and shoulder-length locks that he kept pulled back in a loose tie. He wore a worn field jacket with no insignia that had seen better days, and his hands were calloused in a way that suggested hard work. He was quiet, the kind of quiet that made people assume he was shy or maybe running from something. Most of the town figured it was a messy divorce or unpaid debts, the usual reasons people disappeared into small towns where nobody asked questions. They saw a single black father doing his best, working construction jobs for cash, keeping to himself. Nobody thought much beyond that. His daughter, Maya, was 7 years old, a beautiful brown-skinned girl with bright eyes that seemed to notice everything and her hair pulled back in neat braids. She carried a worn stuffed rabbit everywhere she went, a gray thing with one ear shorter than the other that she called Captain. When they walked into Ruby's that Saturday morning, the bell above the door chimed the same way it always did. Betty, the waitress who had worked there longer than anyone could remember, was already reaching for the coffee pot before they even sat down. She knew Darius took it black, 2 sugars, and that Maya would ask for orange juice in the plastic cup with the cartoon animals on it. They slid into their usual corner booth, the one in the back where Darius could sit facing the door. It was a small detail that most people wouldn't notice, but Maya had started doing the same thing without realizing it. When they sat down, she would glance at the entrance, scan the room once, then settle into her seat. It was like watching a mirror, the way she copied her father's habits without understanding why. Betty appeared with the coffee and juice, setting them down with the ease of someone who had done this 10,000 times. "Morning, Darius," she said. "Usual?" Darius nodded his thanks, his voice soft and warm when he replied. "Thanks, Betty." Maya looked up from the placemat she was already examining, the kind with word searches and mazes printed on cheap paper. "Can I get chocolate chip pancakes today?" she asked, her voice carrying that hopeful tone children use when they already know the answer. Darius smiled, just a slight curve at the corner of his mouth. "It's Saturday," he said. "That's the rule." The diner was filling up with the morning crowd, the kind of mix you'd expect in a military town. A few older couples who had been coming here since before the base expanded. A trucker at the corner table working through a plate of eggs and hash browns. Some college kids from the community college 2 towns over, probably recovering from whatever they had done the night before. The sounds were familiar and comfortable. Silverware on plates, the hiss of the griddle from the kitchen, low conversations that blended into background noise. Darius sipped his coffee and watched Maya work on the maze with a stubby pencil that had been left in the booth. His field jacket hung loose on his frame, and if you looked closely, you could see a faded outline on the shoulder where a patch had once been sewn and then carefully removed. The stitching was gone, but the shadow remained. a ghost of something that used to be there. His dark hands wrapped around the coffee mug showed scars that didn't quite match the story of a construction worker. They were too precise, too deliberate, the kind of marks that came from something other than hammers and nails. The bell above the door chimed again, and a young woman walked in alone. She was in her early 20s, wearing an Army specialist uniform with the last name Patterson stitched across her chest. She moved carefully like someone who had learned to make herself small and took a seat at the counter away from the other customers. When Betty came over, she ordered coffee and toast, her voice barely loud enough to hear. She pulled a paperback book from her bag and opened it, but her eyes didn't really focus on the pages. She was just holding it, using it as a shield. Darius noticed her the way he noticed everything. A brief glance that took in the unit patch, the way she held her shoulders, the exhaustion written in the lines around her eyes. He looked away just as quickly, returning his attention to Maya, who had finished the maze and was now drawing something in the margin of the placemat. "Daddy," she said. "Is she a soldier?" Darius followed her gaze to the woman at the counter. "She is," he said. "Like you used to be?" Maya asked. Darius paused, his coffee cup halfway to his lips. "Different," he said after a moment. The woman at the counter, Specialist Jordan Patterson, sat with her hands wrapped around her mug like it might keep her grounded. Her phone buzzed in her pocket and she ignored it. When it buzzed again a few seconds later, her jaw tightened and she pulled it out long enough to silence it completely before shoving it back into her pocket. She returned to her book, or at least to the pretense of reading it. The diner felt calm, the kind of Saturday morning peace that small towns are built on. But there was a thread of tension running beneath it, invisible but present. Like the moment before a storm when the air pressure changes and animals start acting strange. The bell chimed again, louder this time, because the door was pushed open with more force than necessary. 4 people walked in wearing matching unit shirts, 3 men and 1 woman, all of them carrying the energy of people who had just finished morning physical training and were running on adrenaline and too much testosterone. The leader was a broad-shouldered man with a cocky smile, Staff Sergeant Tyler Knox, whose name was visible on the shirt stretched across his chest. Behind him came Corporal Jake Morrison, Private First Class Derek Vincent, and Specialist Rachel Cole, the only woman in the group who looked less comfortable than the others, but stayed close anyway. They were loud in the way that groups of young soldiers often are, shoving each other and laughing at inside jokes, taking up more space than they needed. Betty glanced up from behind the counter, and her expression tightened, but she said nothing. Other customers looked up briefly and then returned to their meals. The universal response of people who don't want to get involved. Darius's posture didn't change, but his focus shifted. He was still looking at Maya's drawing, still holding his coffee, but every part of him was now tracking the group as they moved through the diner. They spotted Jordan almost immediately. Knox's grin widened and he changed direction, heading straight for the counter. "Well, well," he said, loud enough for half the diner to hear. "Patterson, didn't know you ate real food." Jordan's shoulders tensed, but she didn't look up from her book. Her fingers tightened on the pages, knuckles going white. Morrison laughed, that forced kind of laughter that's meant to encourage bad behavior. "She's ignoring us, Sarge," he said. "That's insubordination." The group closed in around her, not touching, but positioning themselves in a way that boxed her in. Knox slid onto the stool next to her, too close, his knee almost brushing hers. Vincent moved behind her, blocking the path to the door. Cole stood on the other side, uncomfortable but complicit, her presence making it clear that Jordan was surrounded. The laughter was aggressive now, testing boundaries, seeing how far they could push before someone pushed back. Darius watched this unfold with the same calm expression he had worn since walking in. He set his coffee cup down without making a sound, the kind of control that comes from years of practice. Maya had stopped drawing. She was watching the counter now, her small hand gripping the stubby pencil tight. She looked at her father and he put his hand over hers. gentle but firm. "Eat your pancakes, sweetheart," he said quietly. But Maya didn't pick up her fork. She kept watching the way children do when they sense something wrong but don't have the words for it yet. At the counter, Jordan was trying to hold her ground. "You too good to talk to us?" Knox said, leaning closer. "Off base doesn't mean off-duty respect." Jordan's voice was controlled, measured, the tone of someone who has had this conversation before and knows it won't end well no matter what she says. "I'm just trying to have breakfast, Sergeant." Vincent spoke up from behind her, his voice carrying a mock curiosity. "Maybe she's meeting someone. You meeting someone." "Patterson?" Knox reached out and knocked Jordan's book off the counter. It hit the floor with a slap that cut through the ambient noise of the diner. The conversations around them faltered, people glancing over and then quickly away. Jordan bent to pick up the book, and Morrison stepped forward, planting his boot on it before she could reach it. "Oops," he said. "Clumsy." The whole diner could see what was happening now. Betty stood frozen behind the counter with the coffee pot in her hand, her knuckles white around the handle. An older couple in the booth near the window looked down at their plates. The trucker in the corner kept his eyes on his eggs, like they were the most interesting thing in the world. This was the moment that everyone would remember later. The moment when everyone knew something was wrong and everyone chose to pretend they didn't see it. It was easier that way, safer, less complicated. These were soldiers, after all, and this was a military town. And getting involved in military business when you were a civilian was a good way to make your life difficult. So they looked away, every single one of them, and told themselves it wasn't their problem. Jordan stood up, trying to gather her things, trying to leave with whatever dignity she had left. "I need to go," she said, but Knox's hand shot out and caught her sleeve. Not hard, not violent, but firm enough to stop her. "We're not done talking," he said. "Let go of my arm," Jordan said, and there was a tremor in her voice now, fear mixing with anger. "For what?" Knox said, leaning in closer. "You going to file another complaint?" The word "another" landed heavy in the space between them. It told a story all by itself, a history of incidents and reports, and a chain of command that had done nothing. Morrison moved to block the door completely now, his arms crossed, grinning like this was the best entertainment he'd had all week. "Come on, Patterson," he said. "We're just trying to be friendly." Jordan's breathing was coming faster now, her body caught between fight and flight with nowhere to go. In the corner booth, Maya had gone completely still. She wasn't eating her pancakes. She wasn't drawing. She was staring at the counter with wide eyes, her small hands still gripping the pencil like it was the only solid thing in the world. She looked at her father and saw something in his face that she had never seen before. It wasn't anger, exactly. It was something colder, something distant, like he was looking at a problem and calculating solutions in a language she didn't understand yet. Knox's grip tightened on Jordan's sleeve. "You think you're better than us?" he said. "You think just because you went to the IG with your little stories that you're protected?" Jordan's eyes were wet now, but she wasn't crying. Not yet. Fighting to hold it together in front of these men who wanted nothing more than to see her break. "I said, let go," she said again, but her voice cracked on the last word. The entire diner was holding its breath. Betty had backed up until she was pressed against the kitchen doorway. The older couple was staring very intently at nothing. The trucker had his hand on his wallet like he was thinking about just leaving money on the table and walking out. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. Nobody did anything. Maya's whisper cut through the silence like a knife. "Daddy," she said, so quiet that Darius barely heard it. He didn't respond, didn't move. His coffee cup sat on the table in front of him, perfectly still in his hand. "Daddy, please help her," Maya said, and this time her voice carried just enough that he couldn't pretend he hadn't heard. Darius Mitchell had survived 3 tours in Afghanistan and 2 in Iraq. He had been on missions in countries that didn't officially exist, doing things that would never appear in any public record. He had been shot twice and blown up once. He had been decorated 4 times for valor. He had seen friends die and had killed enemies whose faces still visited him some nights when he couldn't sleep. He had walked away from all of it 5 years ago. Walked away from the uniform and the missions and the life because he had decided that being a father to his daughter was more important than being a weapon for his country. But nothing he had experienced in all those years, none of the firefights or explosions or moments where death seemed certain, hit him harder than hearing his 7-year-old daughter ask him to do the right thing. Her voice carried the weight of absolute faith, the belief that her father could fix anything, stop anything, protect anyone. It was the voice of a child who believed her daddy was a hero, and Darius had spent 5 years trying to convince himself that he wasn't that person anymore. He set his coffee cup down on the table. The movement was slow and deliberate, and when the ceramic touched the formica, it made no sound at all. He looked at Maya and saw her watching him with those bright eyes that missed nothing, waiting to see what he would do. He nodded once, just a small movement of his head, and stood up. The walk from the booth to the counter was maybe 15 feet. Darius covered it in a way that made people notice without understanding why. He didn't rush, didn't push through the space. He moved through it like water flowing around obstacles, his body automatically choosing the most efficient path. His hands visible and non-threatening at his sides. When he stopped, he was exactly 3 feet from Knox, close enough to be heard clearly, but far enough to give everyone space. "Let her go," Darius said. His voice was quiet, level, carrying no threat and no emotion, just a simple statement of fact. Knox turned to look at him and saw a black man in his mid-30s with long locks and a faded jacket. Someone who looked like he had walked in off a construction site. The staff sergeant's expression shifted from surprise to amusement. "This your boyfriend, Patterson," he said, and his crew laughed on cue. Jordan shook her head quickly. "I don't know him," she said. Darius didn't look at her. His eyes stayed on Knox. "You heard her ask," he said. "Let go." Knox studied him for a moment, this civilian who had just walked up and inserted himself into military business. He saw no threat, just some townie, probably Jordan's latest mistake, thinking he could play hero. The staff sergeant was a ranger school graduate with 6 years of service. He had been in firefights and led convoys through IED heavy routes. He was trained, tested, and confident in his ability to handle one middle-aged construction worker. "Why don't you mind your business, Pops?" he said. "I'm asking nicely," Darius said. "And I'm telling you to leave," Knox replied, putting more edge into his voice now. The diner was completely silent. Even the kitchen sounds had stopped. Betty was watching from the doorway. The trucker had turned in his seat. The older couple had given up any pretense of not paying attention. Everyone was watching to see what would happen when this nobody civilian challenged a staff sergeant and his crew. Darius took one step closer, moving inside Knox's personal space with the kind of confidence that made the soldier's instincts flicker a warning. "You got a problem, old man," Knox said. But there was something different in his voice now, a note of uncertainty. "Just one," Darius said. "Move." The word hung in the air between them, a line drawn in the sand, an ultimatum delivered without anger or heat. Just a simple instruction. Knox made his choice. He released Jordan's sleeve and turned to face Darius fully, squaring his shoulders, making himself bigger. Then he shoved Darius with both hands. A solid two-handed push to the chest meant to send him stumbling backward and establish dominance. It was the kind of move that had worked 100 times before on people who didn't know how to handle aggression. Darius moved backward exactly 6 inches. His feet adjusted automatically, weight redistributing, balance perfect. He didn't raise his hands, didn't flinch, didn't react at all except to absorb the force and resettle into a stance that looked casual, but was anything but. He just stood there looking at Knox with flat, calm eyes that held no anger and no fear. It was the look of someone evaluating a problem, calculating variables, waiting to see what would happen next. Jordan saw it first. She saw the way Darius's weight had shifted, the way his hands hung loose at his sides but ready, the way he was suddenly taking up more space than he had a moment before without actually moving. Her eyes widened, and she took a step back. "Wait," she said, but it was too late. Knox saw that Darius hadn't fallen back, hadn't been intimidated, hadn't done anything except stand there looking at him with those unsettling, calm eyes. The staff sergeant felt his face flush with anger and embarrassment because his crew was watching, and this nobody had just made him look weak. So he made the choice that would change everything. He cocked his right arm back, wound up for a haymaker punch, and swung at Darius's face with every bit of force and momentum he could generate. What happened next would be replayed on security footage and analyzed and talked about for weeks after. What happened next took exactly 10 seconds. What happened next revealed a truth that had been hidden for 5 years in a small town where nobody asked questions and everyone assumed they knew who Darius Mitchell really was. That shove had been the mistake, not because Darius was violent or wanted to fight, but because in that moment, Tyler Knox had just physically assaulted someone in front of witnesses and given Darius Mitchell legal justification to respond. Have you ever watched someone do something extraordinary and wished you had the courage to act when it mattered? Think about the moments when you stayed silent and consider what it would take to find your voice. If this story resonated with you, I would be grateful if you subscribed. Not for me, but because sometimes we all need reminders of what real courage looks like. Now let me tell you what happened in those 10 seconds. Knox's punch came fast and committed. A haymaker right hook with his full body weight behind it. It was the kind of punch that worked in bars and training yards, the kind that ended fights before they really started. But Darius wasn't there when the fist arrived. He had slipped inside the arc of the swing, moving with an economy of motion that looked effortless. And suddenly, he was too close for the punch to land with any force. His left hand came up and redirected Knox's arm, using the momentum against itself, and his right elbow drove into the staff sergeant's solar plexus with surgical precision. The air left Knox's lungs in a rush, and his eyes went wide with shock. Before he could process what had happened, Darius had swept his front leg and used Knox's own forward momentum to drive him face first into the floor. The impact was heavy and final. Knox hit the linoleum hard, his hands slapping the ground too late to break his fall, and he lay there gasping for air that wouldn't come, his diaphragm spasming from the strike. 3 seconds had elapsed. Morrison reacted on instinct, charging from Darius's left with his arms outstretched for a tackle. He was younger and faster than Knox, had wrestled in high school, thought he knew what he was doing. Darius pivoted to face him, caught his leading arm at the wrist and elbow simultaneously, and applied pressure in a direction that joints weren't meant to bend. Morrison's forward charge turned into a scream as the joint lock took hold. Darius controlled the descent, guiding Morrison down and into the edge of the counter with a kidney shot that was measured and controlled enough to incapacitate, but not to cause permanent damage. Morrison crumpled to the floor beside Knox, holding his arm and making sounds that were somewhere between sobbing and cursing. 6 seconds had elapsed. Vincent had hesitated, watching his 2 friends go down in the space of a heartbeat, trying to process what his eyes were telling him. Then training overcame shock and he committed, going low for a double-leg takedown. Darius sprawled instantly, a wrestler's defensive reflex that stopped the takedown cold and controlled Vincent's head with both hands. He drove one knee into Vincent's chest, not his face, not trying to break ribs, but applying enough force to knock the wind out and shut down the fight. Vincent dropped to his knees and then to his side, curled around his chest and gasping. 9 seconds had elapsed. Cole had both hands up, palms out, backing away. "I'm good," she said quickly. "I'm good." Darius looked at her, evaluated, and nodded once. He stepped back from the three men on the floor, his breathing unchanged, no sweat on his face. His expression as calm as it had been when he first stood up from the booth. The entire diner stared in shocked silence at what they had just witnessed. 10 seconds had elapsed. 3 trained soldiers lay on the floor in various states of pain and humiliation. Darius stood in the middle of them, his faded field jacket hanging loose, his long locks still tied back, his brown skin catching the morning light streaming through the windows. He looked like exactly what he had looked like when he walked in. A quiet black man who kept to himself. Except now, everyone in Ruby's diner knew that wasn't the truth. They didn't know what the truth was, but they knew it wasn't that. The movement had been clean and surgical. No wasted motion, no rage, no loss of control. It was the kind of fighting that didn't come from a gym membership or weekend classes at the community center. It came from somewhere else, from places and experiences that most people only saw in movies, and even then, they didn't really understand what they were watching. Betty stood in the kitchen doorway with one hand over her mouth. The trucker had half risen from his seat, his coffee forgotten. The older couple sat frozen with forks halfway to their mouths. Jordan Patterson was pressed back against the counter, her eyes wide, staring at Darius like she was trying to solve an equation that didn't add up. She had seen enough in her 8 months on base to recognize what she had just witnessed. That wasn't self-defense training from a weekend seminar. That wasn't even regular military combatives. The way he had moved, the precision, the control, the absolute confidence in every motion. She had only seen that kind of movement once before during a joint training exercise when some quiet men in unmarked uniforms had run a demonstration that made the regular infantry look like children playing soldier. Darius turned away from the 3 men on the floor and looked at Jordan. "You okay?" he asked, his voice still quiet and level, like nothing unusual had happened. Jordan opened her mouth, but no sound came out at first. When she finally managed to speak, her voice was barely a whisper. "Who are you?" Darius's expression didn't change. "Nobody," he said. "You should file a report." Then he turned and walked back to his booth, where Maya sat watching with wide eyes and Captain the Rabbit clutched in her small hands. Knox was trying to get up, pushing himself onto his hands and knees, coughing and gasping. Morrison was still holding his arm, rocking slightly. Vincent had managed to sit up, but was hunched over, arms wrapped around his ribs. The fight had gone out of all of them. Whatever had just happened, whatever they had just experienced, had stripped away the bravado and the pack mentality and left them facing a simple truth. They had picked a fight with someone so far beyond their capability that it was embarrassing. Darius slid into the booth across from Maya and picked up his coffee cup. It was still warm. He took a sip and set it down, then looked at his daughter. "You okay, sweetheart?" he asked. Maya nodded slowly, still processing what she had just seen. "I knew you would help, Daddy," she said. Her voice carried absolute faith, like there had never been any doubt in her mind. Darius reached across and adjusted her placemat, moving her orange juice closer. "Finish eating," he said gently. The bell above the door chimed, and Deputy Constable Harper walked in, hand on her duty belt, eyes scanning the scene with the quick assessment of someone who had been doing this job for 20 years. She saw the 3 soldiers on the floor in various states of distress, saw the civilians watching with expressions of shock, saw Darius Mitchell sitting calmly in his booth, helping his daughter with her pancakes. Her eyes narrowed slightly as she pieced together what must have happened. Jordan intercepted her before she could speak, moving quickly away from the counter. "Deputy Harper," she said, her words coming fast. "Those men assaulted me. They grabbed me. Wouldn't let me leave." She pointed at Darius. "He defended me. I want to press charges against them." Her voice was shaking but firm, the voice of someone who had been pushed too far and was done staying quiet. The trucker stood up from his corner table. "I saw the whole thing," he said. His voice carried the weight of someone who had decided that staying silent wasn't an option anymore. They cornered her, grabbed her sleeve, wouldn't let her go. He asked them to stop. They shoved him first. The older couple nodded in agreement. "That's exactly what happened," the woman said. "Those soldiers started it." Her husband added, "All he did was defend that young lady." Harper looked around the diner, saw the agreement on every face, then walked over to where Knox was finally getting to his feet. "You active duty soldier?" she asked. Knox nodded, still trying to catch his breath. "Staff sergeant?" "Ma'am," he managed. "Fort Carson." Harper's expression hardened. "Then you should know better than to assault a civilian and a fellow service member. You're lucky I'm not arresting you right now. Get out of my town, all of you." Knox looked like he wanted to argue, wanted to say something about how they had been jumped, about how this wasn't fair, about how a civilian had just taken down 3 trained soldiers and that couldn't be right. But the words died in his throat because he saw the truth written on every face in the diner. He had started it. Everyone had seen. There was no way to spin this that didn't make him look like exactly what he was, a bully who had picked on the wrong person. He and Morrison and Vincent limped toward the door, Cole following behind them with her eyes down. The bell chimed as they left, and the sound seemed louder than usual in the silence. Harper approached Darius's booth, her expression thoughtful. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, "you need medical attention?" Darius looked up from watching Maya eat her pancakes. "No, ma'am," he said. "That was impressive," Harper said, watching him carefully. "Just protecting someone who needed help," Darius replied. His tone was matter-of-fact, offering no additional information. Harper nodded slowly. "I may need a statement from you." Darius nodded. "I'll be around." Harper gave him one more long look, the kind of look that said she was going to be thinking about this for a while, then turned and headed for the door. Jordan was still standing at the counter, her phone in her hand, staring at the screen with an expression of dawning realization. She had been filming when the harassment had started to escalate. She had pulled out her phone and started recording the way she had been doing for 3 months. Every time Knox and his crew came after her, building evidence, documenting the pattern. She had the whole thing on video. The harassment, the grab, Darius's intervention, all of it. She played it back, watching the screen with wide eyes. The video showed everything, the way Darius had moved, the precision of every strike, the complete control. She watched it 3 times, trying to process what she was seeing. Then she opened her contacts and scrolled down, her thumb hovering over a name. Captain Samuel Brooks, Naval Liaison. She had met him once during a joint training briefing, a quiet man with sharp eyes who had given her his card and told her to call if she ever needed anything. At the time, she had thought it was just military courtesy. Now she wondered. She attached the video and typed a message. "Need identification on civilian defender. Techniques match Tier 1. Urgent." She hit send before she could second-guess herself, then looked across the diner at Darius, who was cutting Maya's pancakes into smaller pieces. He looked so ordinary sitting there, so completely normal that it was almost possible to believe the last 10 minutes hadn't happened. Almost. Darius could feel eyes on him, but he ignored them. He focused on Maya, on making sure she was okay, on maintaining the Saturday morning routine that had been their anchor for 3 years. Betty approached the table cautiously, coffee pot in hand. "Can I warm that up for you, Darius?" she asked, her voice gentle, respectful, in a way it hadn't been before. Darius nodded and she poured, her hand only shaking slightly. "That was a brave thing you did," she said quietly. "Just doing what's right," Darius said. Betty nodded, set the coffee pot down, and pulled a $20 bill from her apron pocket. "Breakfast is on me today," she said. Darius started to protest, but she held up her hand. "I insist, you just—" She paused, searching for words. "You just reminded everyone in here what courage looks like," Darius accepted the gesture with a nod, then returned his attention to Maya. She had finished her pancakes and was now drawing again on the placemat. But the drawing had changed. Before it had been flowers and sunshine. Now she was drawing a figure, tall and strong, standing between other smaller figures and something dark on the other side of the page. Darius watched her work, seeing his daughter process what she had witnessed in the only way a 7-year-old knew how. The diner slowly returned to its normal rhythm, people finishing their meals, conversations resuming in hushed tones. But everything had changed in a fundamental way. The man in the corner booth wasn't just Darius anymore. He was something else, something undefined. And everyone who had been there would remember this morning for the rest of their lives. They would tell the story at dinner parties and family gatherings, the time they saw a single black dad take down 3 soldiers in 10 seconds. The details would get embellished over time, the way stories always do, but the core truth would remain. Something extraordinary had happened in an ordinary place. When Darius finally stood to leave, pulling out his wallet to leave a tip, despite Betty's insistence that breakfast was free, every person in the diner watched. He helped Maya with her jacket, took her hand, and walked to the door. As he reached for the handle, Jordan called out, "Sir, wait!" Darius turned, his expression neutral. She approached quickly, pulling something from her pocket. It was her unit patch, the one sewn onto her uniform. She held it out to him. "In case you ever need anything," she said. "From me or anyone who served." Her voice carried weight, a promise of debt and gratitude. Darius looked at the patch for a long moment, then accepted it with a nod. "You're going to be okay, Specialist," he said. Jordan's eyes were wet, but she wasn't crying. "Because of you," she said. Darius didn't respond to that. He just turned and walked out with Maya, the bell chiming behind them. Through the window, Jordan watched his faded blue pickup pull out of the parking lot and disappear down Main Street. Then her phone buzzed in her hand. The message was from Captain Brooks. "Video received, identification confirmed. Admiral Thompson has been notified." Jordan read it 3 times, her heart pounding. Admiral. She had expected maybe some interest from base security, maybe an inquiry, but an admiral didn't get involved in random diner incidents. An admiral got involved when something much bigger was in play. She looked down at her phone and whispered to the empty air, "Who are you?" That evening, Darius's small house sat quiet on its 3 acres of land. The property was isolated, set back from the main road, surrounded by pine trees that provided privacy and peace. Inside, Maya was brushing her teeth in the bathroom while Darius cleaned up from dinner. The routine was familiar and comforting. Bath time, toothbrushing, story time, bed. The same every night, the same as it had been for 5 years. When Maya was finally tucked in, Captain the Rabbit nestled beside her, she looked up at her father with serious eyes. "Daddy," she said, "why were those men so mean to that lady?" Darius sat on the edge of her bed, thinking about how to answer. "Sometimes people hurt others because they're hurting inside," he said. "But you stopped them," Maya said. "I did," Darius confirmed. "Will they hurt someone else?" Maya asked. Darius was quiet for a moment. "I don't know, baby," he said honestly. "I hope not." Maya considered this, her small face thoughtful. "I was scared," she said. "But then I remembered you always help people." Darius felt something tighten in his chest. "You were very brave today," he said. "Like you?" Maya asked. Darius smiled slightly. "Braver," he said. He kissed her forehead and turned off the light, leaving the door cracked open the way she liked it. In the hallway, he stood for a moment, listening to her breathing settle into the rhythm of sleep. He walked out to the porch and stood in the darkness, looking at the stars that were visible beyond the reach of town lights. His hands rested on the railing, the same hands that had taken down 3 men in 10 seconds. The same hands that had held his infant daughter when his wife was buried. the same hands that had pulled triggers and thrown grenades and done things he would never talk about. He had spent 5 years building a wall between who he had been and who he was trying to become. Today, that wall had developed cracks. The night was quiet except for crickets and the distant sound of traffic on the highway. Darius stood there for a long time, thinking about choices and consequences, about the person he had been and the person he was trying to be. He thought about Maya's whispered, "Please." The way those 2 words had cut through 5 years of carefully constructed distance from his past. He thought about Jordan Patterson's face, the relief and gratitude and recognition. He thought about the 3 soldiers who had learned a hard lesson about respect and consequences. He thought about all the lives that connected to his in ways seen and unseen. The ripples that spread out from every choice, every action, every moment of courage. Inside the house, he could hear Maya singing to herself. The sound was pure and happy and completely ordinary. Darius smiled and walked inside, closing the door behind him, returning to the life that mattered most. The warrior could rest. The father was home. And in this moment, in this place, that was enough. Morning came early. Darius was up at 5:30 making coffee, the sky just beginning to lighten beyond the kitchen window. He had learned to function on minimal sleep during his years in the service, and the habit had never left. He was on his second cup, sitting at the kitchen table, and reviewing some construction estimates when he heard the sound. Engines, multiple engines, military engines. His body tensed automatically, years of training making his senses sharpen. He set down his coffee cup and walked to the front window. 3 black SUVs were turning onto his driveway, kicking up dust from the gravel road. They moved in formation, practiced and deliberate, and Darius knew immediately this wasn't a social call. He walked to the front door and stepped out onto the porch, leaving the door open behind him so he could hear if Maya woke up. The morning air was cool and still. Birds were starting to sing in the trees. It was the kind of morning that should have been peaceful. The SUVs came to a stop in a semicircle facing the house. Doors opened in sequence. 2 military police officers stepped out first, their presence authoritative but not aggressive. Then from the second vehicle came a Navy captain in service dress blues, his uniform crisp and formal despite the early hour. From the third vehicle, the rear door opened and a man stepped out who made everyone else look like they were playing dress-up. Rear Admiral Nathaniel Thompson was in his late 50s with silver hair and a bearing that spoke of decades of command. 4 stars on his shoulder boards caught the early morning light. He wore his uniform with the ease of someone who had been wearing it so long it was practically a second skin. He walked toward the porch with measured steps, his hands clasped behind his back, his eyes taking in every detail of the property, the house, and the black man standing on the porch watching him approach. Darius didn't move. He stood with his hands visible at his sides, his posture relaxed but ready, watching the Admiral cross the distance between them. When Thompson reached the bottom of the porch steps, he stopped and looked up at Darius. The 2 men studied each other for a long moment, and something unspoken passed between them, recognition and respect, and the weight of shared understanding. "Master Chief Petty Officer Darius Mitchell," Thompson said. His voice was quiet, but carried authority that had nothing to do with volume. Or should I say former Master Chief? Darius's expression didn't change. "I go by Darius now, sir," he said. Thompson nodded slowly, looking at the long locks, the civilian clothes, the house. "Nice life you've built here," he said. "Did I break a law, Admiral?" Darius asked. Thompson shook his head. "No, Mitchell. You defended a service member from assault. Technically, you're a civilian hero." There was something in the way Thompson said it that made it clear this wasn't the real reason he was here. The Admiral's eyes moved to the window where Maya's face had appeared, her brown skin and curious eyes peering out at the vehicles and the men in uniform. "That's her, isn't it?" Thompson said. "Maya." Darius's entire body tensed, protective instinct flooding through him. "Sir, with respect," he started. But Thompson held up a hand. "I'm not here to cause problems," he said. "I'm here because yesterday you revealed yourself." Thompson pulled a tablet from inside his jacket and turned it on. He tapped the screen a few times, then turned it to face Darius. The security footage from Ruby's diner played on the screen, showing the entire confrontation from multiple angles. Thompson let it play for a few seconds, then paused it at the moment when Darius had slipped inside Knox's punch. "A 22-year-old Army specialist filed a report," Thompson said. "Unknown civilian intervened when she was being harassed, said he moved like someone who had done this in the dark." He scrolled to another video, this one from Jordan's phone, showing the same events from a different angle. "Took me about 30 seconds to confirm it was you," Thompson said. He played the footage in slow motion, frame by frame, and Darius watched himself move with precision that was unmistakable to anyone who knew what they were looking at. "Textbook redirection," Thompson said quietly. "Joint manipulation, controlled force escalation. You didn't break a single bone, Mitchell. You could have, but you didn't." Darius said nothing. He watched the footage play out, seeing himself through someone else's eyes, seeing the truth written in every movement. Thompson turned off the tablet and looked at him. "The specialist, Jordan Patterson, has been filing harassment complaints for 3 months," he said. "Chain of command buried every single one. She was 1 day away from going AWOL just to escape it. Those men, Staff Sergeant Knox and his crew, they're being court-martialed, dishonorable discharge likely, all because you stood up when no one else would." The sun was fully up now, light streaming across the property. Inside the house, Darius could hear Maya moving around, probably wondering why there were military vehicles in the driveway. Thompson heard it too. "She's a kid, sir," Darius said quietly. "Same age I was when I joined. She deserved better." "She did," Thompson agreed. "And she got it because of you." The Admiral sat down on the porch steps, uninvited, the gesture making the moment less formal, more personal. "You left because of her," he said, looking toward the window. Darius's jaw tightened, but he didn't deny it. "I left because I wanted to be a father more than I wanted to be a weapon," he said. Thompson nodded slowly. "Your wife, Angela," he said. "I read the file." Darius's hands clenched at his sides. "Drunk driver," Thompson continued. "Head-on collision. She died instantly. You were in Yemen when it happened." "I was told I could finish the mission or come home," Darius said, his voice flat. "I finished the mission. By the time I got stateside, she had already been buried. Maya was with her grandmother, 2 years old. Didn't recognize me." "So, you retired?" Thompson said. "I quit," Darius corrected. "There's a difference." Thompson stood, brushing off his uniform. "You didn't quit, Mitchell. You chose her over the mission. That's not weakness. That's the hardest decision a warrior can make. Master Chief Petty Officer Darius Mitchell, Navy SEAL, 3 Silver Stars, 2 Bronze Stars with Valor, Navy Cross recipient, member of SEAL Team 6 for 4 years, 17 confirmed direct action missions. He had been declared retired for medical reasons 5 years ago, the same month his wife died. The same month he had decided that raising his daughter was more important than anything the military could ask of him. And now a Rear Admiral was standing on his porch at 6 in the morning, which meant something big was happening. "I didn't come here just to thank you, Mitchell," Thompson said. "I came because the Navy needs you." "No, sir," Darius said immediately. The response was firm and absolute. "You haven't heard the—" Thompson started, but Darius cut him off. "Respectfully, sir, no. I did my time. I buried friends. I lost my wife. I'm not losing my daughter." Thompson pulled a folder from his jacket, classified markings visible on the cover. "Hostage situation," he said. "U.S. Embassy contractor and his family. Kidnapped in Mogadishu 2 days ago. The team we'd normally send doesn't have your experience. You have 100 guys who can do this. Darius said. We have guys who can try, Thompson replied. We need someone who will succeed. The contractor's daughter is 8 years old, Mitchell, same age as Maya. The words hit like a physical blow. Darius's hand tightened on the folder, but he didn't open it. That's not fair, he said. No, Thompson agreed. It's not, but it's true. I'm not ordering you, Thompson said. You're retired. This is a request. 30 days, 1 mission, then you come home to her. And if I don't come home, Darius asked. Then Maya gets a flag and a medal and a trust fund, Thompson said quietly. Same as every other Gold Star kid. So, you want me to risk making my daughter an orphan to save someone else's daughter? Darius said. I want you to do what you've always done, Thompson replied. Save people who can't save themselves. Think about the people in your life who serve quietly, who sacrifice without seeking credit, who stand up when it would be easier to look away. Their stories matter. If this moved you, I hope you'll subscribe and be part of a community that values these narratives. Now, let me show you what happened when Darius had to make an impossible choice. The sound of Maya's voice from the doorway cut through the tension like a knife through water. Daddy, she said, and both men turned to see her standing there in her pajamas, holding Captain the Rabbit against her chest, her bare feet on the wooden threshold. Her eyes were wide as she looked at the vehicles, the uniformed men, the Admiral standing on her porch. Darius moved immediately to her side, placing himself between her and the others in a gesture so automatic he didn't even think about it. Maya looked up at Admiral Thompson with the fearless curiosity that only children possess. Are you here because my daddy helped that lady? She asked. Thompson knelt down slowly, bringing himself to her eye level with the kind of respect that made it clear he understood he was in the presence of someone important. I am, he said gently. Your daddy did something very brave yesterday. Maya nodded seriously. I know, she said. He always helps people. Thompson looked up at Darius and something passed between them, an understanding that went deeper than words. She's right, he said, standing and straightening his uniform. He pulled a card from his pocket and held it out to Darius. You have 72 hours to decide, he said. After that, we move forward without you. He paused, then added quietly, Mitchell, whatever you decide, thank you for yesterday. That specialist, Jordan Patterson, she has a little sister. Because of you, she'll get to see her again. The Admiral turned and walked back to the vehicles, his officers falling in behind him. Darius watched them drive away, the dust settling slowly on the gravel road as the sound of engines faded into the distance. Maya took his hand, her small fingers wrapping around 2 of his larger ones. Daddy, she said, are you going away? Darius knelt down to face her, his hands on her shoulders. I don't know yet, sweetheart, he said honestly. If you go, Maya asked, will you help people like you helped the lady? That's the job, Darius said. Maya was quiet for a moment, thinking with the seriousness that sometimes caught him off guard. Then you should go, she said. Darius felt something break open in his chest. You want me to leave? He asked. Maya shook her head quickly. No, she said, but you taught me that sometimes we have to do hard things to help people. She hugged him tight. Her face pressed against his shoulder. I'll be scared, she said, her voice muffled, but I'll be proud. Darius held her close. This small person who had just taught him something profound about courage and sacrifice, and realized that in trying to protect her from the world, he had been the one learning the most important lessons. The next 3 days passed in a strange kind of suspended time. Darius went through the motions of his normal life, taking construction jobs, making meals, reading bedtime stories. But his mind was somewhere else. The folder sat on his kitchen counter, still sealed, the classified markings visible every time he walked past. He didn't need to open it to know what was inside. A family in danger, a mission that would require everything he had spent 5 years trying to leave behind. A choice between the life he had built and the skills he still possessed. On Saturday morning, they went back to Ruby's diner, the same booth, the same time, maintaining the ritual that had become their anchor. Betty poured coffee before they even sat down, and Maya ordered chocolate chip pancakes without being asked. The diner was quieter than usual, people glancing at their booth and then quickly away. The story of what had happened having spread through the small town in the way that stories always do. Darius could feel the weight of their attention, but he ignored it, focusing on Maya as she worked on the word search on her placemat. The bell above the door chimed, and Jordan Patterson walked in. She was wearing her uniform, but something about her had changed. She stood straighter, moved with more confidence, and when she saw Darius, she didn't hesitate. She walked directly to the booth and Darius nodded, giving her permission to approach. "I'm sorry to interrupt," she said. "I just needed to say thank you." "You don't need to," Darius said. "I do," Jordan insisted. "I was going to quit, leave the army. But you reminded me why I joined." Maya looked up from her placemat. "My daddy's the best at helping people," she said with absolute certainty. Jordan's eyes filled, but she blinked the tears back. "He really is," she agreed. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper and something small wrapped in cloth. She set them both on the table. The note was handwritten in careful script. "To the man who stood up when no one else would, thank you for seeing me." It was signed simply, Jordan. The cloth unfolded to reveal her unit patch. The same one she had offered before, but this time it had been sewn onto a small piece of backing to make it permanent. "In case you ever need anything," she said, "from me or anyone in my unit." Darius accepted the patch with a nod of respect. "You're going to be okay, Specialist," he said. "Sergeant now," Jordan corrected with a small smile. "They're investigating the whole chain of command. Knox and his crew are facing court-martial. Everything's changing." "Good," Darius said simply. Jordan nodded, then turned to Maya. "You should be very proud of your daddy," she said. "I am," Maya replied. "He helps people." After Jordan left, Maya picked up the note and read it slowly, sounding out the words she didn't know. "Daddy," she said when she finished, "are you going to help the other people? The ones the Admiral told you about?" Darius looked at his daughter, at her bright eyes and serious expression, at Captain the Rabbit sitting on the seat beside her, and he realized that she already knew his answer. "Yeah, baby," he said quietly. "I think I am." Maya nodded like she had expected nothing less. "When do you go?" she asked. "Soon," Darius said. "But I'll come back. I promise." "I know," Maya said with perfect faith. "You always keep promises." 2 weeks later, Darius stood on the tarmac at Peterson Air Force Base, watching the sun rise over the flight line. He was in full tactical gear for the first time in 5 years, the weight of it familiar and strange all at once. His locks had been cut short, his face clean-shaven, and looking at his reflection that morning, he had barely recognized the man staring back. The warrior he had tried to bury was back, standing in the Colorado dawn, preparing to board a C-130 that would take him halfway around the world to do things he couldn't talk about in places that didn't officially exist. Maya stood beside him wearing a navy ball cap that someone had given her, several sizes too large, the brim nearly covering her eyes. She had been quiet during the drive to the base, holding Captain and looking out the window at the passing landscape. Now she stood on the tarmac, watching the aircraft being prepared, the load masters moving with practiced efficiency, and Darius wondered what was going through her mind. Admiral Thompson approached across the tarmac, his uniform crisp despite the early hour. "Master Chief," he said with a nod, "good to have you back." 30 days, sir," Darius said. "Then I'm done." "Understood," Thompson replied. Bring them home. Always do, Darius said, and there was something in his voice that made it clear this wasn't bravado, but simple statement of fact. He had never failed to complete a mission, and he didn't intend to start now. Darius knelt down in front of Maya, bringing himself to her eye level. "I'll be back before your birthday," he said. "I promise." "I know," Maya said. "You always keep promises." She held out Captain the Rabbit, offering him with both hands like a sacred object. "Take Captain," she said. "He'll keep you safe." Darius shook his head gently. "I can't take Captain," he said. "You need him." Maya's expression was serious beyond her years. "You need him more," she said firmly. "Bring him home to me." Darius took the rabbit carefully, feeling the weight of the trust she was placing in him. The stuffed animal was worn soft from years of being held, one ear shorter than the other from some long-ago accident, and it smelled like home. He tucked it carefully into his tactical vest, right over his heart, securing it so it wouldn't fall. "I love you, sweetheart," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "I love you, Daddy," Maya replied. "Come home." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of everything. A command and a prayer and an expression of absolute faith, all wrapped together. The C-130's engines roared to life, the sound cutting through the morning air. Darius stood and walked toward the loading ramp, his gear secure, his mind already shifting into mission mode. He turned back once and saw Maya standing there with Admiral Thompson's hand on her shoulder, her brown face trying so hard to be brave. Darius raised his hand in a salute, the gesture formal and final. Maya returned it, her small hand coming up to her forehead in an approximation of proper form that was both perfect and heartbreaking. Then Darius turned and walked up the ramp into the aircraft, and the moment was over. The ramp closed behind him, sealing him into the belly of the plane with the rest of his team. Men he had worked with before. Men who knew what he was capable of and were glad to have him back. The C-130 taxied, turned, and took off into the rising sun, carrying Darius Mitchell away from everything he loved toward a mission that required everything he had been. The operation took 33 days. Darius didn't talk about what happened during those 33 days. Not to Maya, not to anyone. The official record would show that a U.S. Embassy contractor named Robert Hayes and his family had been recovered safely from their captors in Mogadishu. 0 casualties on the rescue team, 3 terrorists neutralized. The mission had been executed with surgical precision by a team that moved through the night like shadows, extracted their targets, and disappeared before anyone knew they had been there. What the record wouldn't show was the 8-year-old girl named Sophie Hayes, who had been found in a locked room, terrified and alone, clutching a stuffed elephant the same way Maya clutched Captain. It wouldn't show how Darius had been the one to pick her up, to carry her out of that place, to promise her that everything was going to be okay. It wouldn't show how he had thought about Maya every single moment. How Captain the Rabbit had stayed in his vest through the entire operation. How the thought of his daughter waiting for him had kept him focused when everything else was chaos and violence and darkness. The C-130 touched down at Peterson Air Force Base 35 days after it had taken off. Darius walked down the ramp into Colorado sunshine, still in his tactical gear, still carrying the weight of what he had done. Admiral Thompson was there, waiting along with several other officers, and they snapped to attention as he approached. "Master Chief," Thompson said with genuine respect. "Well done." Darius nodded, too tired for words. The Admiral leaned in closer. "Your daughter is waiting at your house," he said quietly. "My aide drove her there an hour ago. Go home, Mitchell. You earned it." Darius drove through Pinehurst in his old pickup truck, still wearing his tactical vest because he hadn't taken the time to change, just wanting to get home. The town looked exactly the same as it had when he left, the same quiet streets, the same familiar buildings, but he felt different. He had gone back to being the person he thought he had left behind, and now he was returning to the life he had built, and somewhere in his mind, he was trying to reconcile how to be both. He turned onto his gravel driveway and saw Maya sitting on the porch steps, drawing on a pad of paper, Admiral Thompson's aide standing nearby at a respectful distance. When she heard the truck, she looked up and her face transformed, pure joy breaking across it like sunrise. "Daddy!" she screamed, and she was running before he even had the door open. Darius climbed out and caught her as she launched herself at him, wrapping her arms around his neck and her legs around his waist, holding on like she would never let go. "Did you get hurt?" she asked, pulling back to look at his face, checking him over with serious eyes. "Not even once," Darius said. "Captain protected me." He reached into his vest and pulled out the rabbit, now slightly more worn than before, and Maya took him carefully. She looked down at Captain and noticed something new. Someone had sewn a small patch onto the rabbit's chest. A Navy SEAL trident, the same symbol that had once been on Darius's uniform. She looked up at her father with wonder. "Captain's a SEAL now?" she asked. "He earned it," Darius said seriously. "He kept me safe the whole time." They walked into the house together, Maya chattering about everything that had happened while he was gone. About school and her friends and the project she was working on. Darius listened, letting her voice wash over him, grounding him back in this reality, this life, this purpose that was bigger than any mission. He made her lunch, helped her with homework, read her stories, all the normal things that felt more precious now than they ever had before. That evening, Admiral Thompson called. "The Navy wants to discuss bringing you back full-time," he said. "We could use someone with your skills and experience." "No, sir," Darius said firmly. "With respect, I did what you asked. I helped those people, but my place is here." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "I understand," Thompson said finally. "Mitchell, thank you for everything." Darius ended the call and looked at Maya, who was coloring at the kitchen table. Captain sitting beside her, and he knew he had made the right choice. The following Saturday morning, they went back to Ruby's diner at 8:15 exactly. The same booth, the same order, the same ritual that had sustained them through everything. Betty poured coffee and set down orange juice and said, "Welcome back, Darius," her voice carrying warmth and respect. Maya ordered chocolate chip pancakes, and Darius said, "It's Saturday. That's the rule." And everything was exactly as it should be. The bell above the door chimed, and Jordan Patterson walked in, now wearing Staff Sergeant stripes on her uniform. She saw them and smiled, taking a seat at the counter. She looked different, too, more confident, more settled, like someone who had found her footing. When she caught Darius's eye, she raised her coffee cup in a small salute. And he nodded back. No words were needed. They understood each other, two people who had been changed by a moment of courage in an ordinary place. Maya worked on her word search while Darius drank his coffee and watched the morning light stream through the windows, the diner filled with its usual Saturday crowd. People coming and going, living their lives, unaware of the stories contained in the quiet black man in the corner booth and his daughter. Betty refilled his coffee and left them in peace. The sounds of the diner wrapped around them like a comfortable blanket. This was home. This was peace. This was what he had fought for. Maya looked up from her placemat. "Daddy," she said, "I told everyone at school you're a hero." Darius shook his head slightly. "I'm just a dad," he said. Maya considered this with her serious expression. "You're both," she said finally, and there was such certainty in her voice that Darius didn't argue. Maybe she was right. Maybe it was possible to be both things, the warrior and the father, the protector and the provider. Maybe you didn't have to choose between them. Maybe the real courage was in learning how to be both. The morning passed in peaceful routine. They finished breakfast, paid the check, left a tip for Betty. As they walked to the door, Maya took his hand and swung it between them. Happy and carefree, a 7-year-old girl who knew her father would always come home, always keep his promises, always be there when she needed him. The bell chimed as they stepped out into the sunshine, and Darius helped her into the truck, buckled her in, handed her captain. They drove home through the quiet streets of Pinehurst, past the houses where people were just starting their weekends, past the park where children played, past all the ordinary moments that made up an ordinary life. But Darius knew now that there was nothing ordinary about any of it. Every moment of peace, every Saturday morning at the diner, every bedtime story and homework session and simple conversation was precious beyond measure. These were the things worth fighting for, worth protecting, worth coming home to. At the house, Maya ran inside to work on her drawing project, and Darius stood on the porch for a moment, looking out at his 3 acres of land, the pine trees that provided privacy, the gravel driveway where military vehicles had once parked. He thought about the path that had brought him here. From the battlefields of Afghanistan to the teams of SEAL Team 6 to this small house in a small town where nobody knew his story. And that was exactly how he wanted it. He thought about the contractor's daughter, Sophie, safely home with her family now, probably clutching her stuffed elephant the same way Maya clutched Captain. He thought about Jordan Patterson, still serving, still fighting, but with the support she deserved. He thought about the 3 soldiers who had learned a hard lesson about respect and consequences. He thought about all the lives that connected to his in ways seen and unseen. The ripples that spread out from every choice, every action, every moment of courage. Inside the house, he could hear Maya singing to herself while she drew. The sound was pure and happy and completely ordinary. Darius smiled and walked inside, closing the door behind him, returning to the life that mattered most. The warrior could rest. The father was home. And in this moment, in this place, that was enough. The months turned into a year, and the story of the diner incident became just one thread in the larger fabric of their lives. Maya turned 8, then 9, growing taller and smarter and more herself with each passing day, her hair now styled in different braids and twists that Darius had learned to do on YouTube. Darius continued to build their quiet life, the construction jobs, the Saturday mornings, the bedtime rituals. They planted a garden in the spring, and Maya learned about patience as she waited for the vegetables to grow. They hiked the trails in the national forest, and Darius taught her about reading the land, about being aware of her surroundings, about respect for nature. Sometimes Admiral Thompson would call with requests for consultation, situations where his expertise could be valuable without requiring him to deploy. Darius would listen, offer his thoughts, and politely decline to do more. His place was here. His mission was raising his daughter. The Navy had other operators, younger men, who could do the work. Maya only had one father. Jordan Patterson was promoted to staff sergeant and eventually transferred to a new unit where her leadership skills were recognized and valued. She sent occasional emails updating Darius on her progress, thanking him again for changing the trajectory of her career and her life. She had found her voice, learned to advocate for herself and others, and was making a real difference. She had also started a mentorship program for junior enlisted women, creating the support system she wished had existed when she needed it. The 3 soldiers from the morning in the diner had received their dishonorable discharges and disappeared into civilian life. The investigation had revealed a pattern of harassment and abuse that went far beyond Jordan, and their removal had led to broader reforms in how complaints were handled on base. One moment of courage from one person had created ripples that touched dozens of lives. On a Saturday morning, 3 years after the incident, Darius and Maya sat in their usual booth at Ruby's diner. She was 10 now, gangly and growing fast, but she still ordered chocolate chip pancakes, and he still said, "It's Saturday," That's the rule. Captain the Rabbit sat on the seat beside her, more worn than ever. The sealed trident patch faded, but still visible. Betty poured coffee and smiled at them. These regulars who had been coming here for 6 years now, part of the fabric of the place. A young family came into the diner, parents with a daughter about Maya's age. They took the booth across from Darius and Maya, the father positioning himself to face the door the same way Darius did. The man's eyes met Darius's, and something passed between them, recognition of a shared experience. The man had the look of someone who had served, who knew what it was to carry things that couldn't be spoken. He nodded slightly, and Darius nodded back. No words needed, just the acknowledgement that they understood each other. Maya noticed the exchange. "Is he like you?" she asked quietly. "Probably," Darius said. "Does his daughter know?" Maya asked. "I don't know," Darius said. "Does it matter?" Maya thought about this. "I guess not," she said. "What matters is that he's here with her." "Exactly," Darius said, struck once again by his daughter's wisdom. "You don't have to know someone's whole story to recognize they're doing their best. We're all just trying to do right by the people we love." The morning sun streamed through the diner windows, illuminating dust motes in the air, catching the steam rising from coffee cups, making everything look golden and perfect. In that moment, in that place, Darius felt complete peace. The warrior had found his purpose in being a father. The father had learned that courage comes in many forms, and the daughter had taught both of them that sometimes the most powerful words aren't shouted from rooftops, but whispered in moments of fear and faith. The story that began with 2 words in a small-town diner didn't end with dramatic fanfare or grand gestures. It ended the way most meaningful stories do, with quiet moments of connection, with lessons learned and integrated, with the simple choice to keep showing up for the people who matter most. Darius Mitchell had been a warrior and would always carry that part of himself. But he had learned that the greatest battles aren't always fought with weapons, and the most important victories aren't measured in missions completed, but in promises kept. Every Saturday morning at 8:15, a faded blue pickup truck pulls into the gravel lot at Ruby's Diner. A black man and his daughter walk through the door and take their usual booth. He orders coffee black with 2 sugars. She orders chocolate chip pancakes. It's Saturday. That's the rule. And in this simple ritual, in this ordinary moment, repeated week after week, year after year, is contained everything that matters about courage, sacrifice, faith, and love. In our lives, we encounter people whose quiet strength shapes the world in ways we may never fully understand. They serve without seeking recognition, sacrifice without demanding acknowledgement, and stand up for others when it would be easier to look away. These stories matter because they remind us that heroism isn't always loud or obvious. Sometimes it looks like a single father in a diner, a 7-year-old girl with a stuffed rabbit, and 2 words that changed everything.